Chapters 15 to 19 of North Lancashire, Cambridge County Geographies, by J. E. Marr.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15: Agriculture, Forestry. As many of the inhabitants of North Lancashire have from time immemorial essentially subsisted by agriculture, we must devote some attention to it. In doing so, it is well to note first the principal factors which control the agricultural operations of any given county or district. These are latitude, altitude, climate, soil, character of the people, and markets for the produce. Latitude is of special importance in affecting the nature of the corn crops, for the county is too far north to allow of successful cultivation of wheat on a large scale, while on the contrary it suits the growth of oats, and accordingly we find that this is the chief kind of corn grown. Altitude is responsible for the dividing line between the areas devoted to the cultivation of crops and to permanent pasture. The area of the former is chiefly in the lowlands and valley bottoms, whereas much of the latter is on the upper portions of the fells. The line separating the tracts where arable cultivation is profitable from those of permanent pasture may in North Lancashire be roughly placed at a height of 900 feet above sea level. It will have been gathered from the remarks made in a previous chapter that the county enjoys an equable climate with fairly warm winters and cool summers, and that it is essentially humid. Such a climate is suitable to the growth of many crops, and has always favoured grass rather than arable farming. We have considered the soil in the geological chapter. It was there seen that there were four important varieties, namely the clayey soil of the slate rocks, the thin light soil of the mountain limestone tracts, the sandy soil of the millstone grit and new red sandstone regions, and the mixture of peat and silt bordering parts of the coast and occupying the sites of infilled lakes. The agriculture of each of these soils is marked by special features. The character of the inhabitants is also of great importance. The physical strength, capacity for work, and tenacity of purpose, largely inherited from their Scandinavian ancestors, and fostered by the struggle against physical conditions which cause the produce to be wrung from the earth by hard labour, have enabled the natives to overcome the difficulties with which they were confronted when a weaker and a more indolent race would have been worsted in the struggle. Lastly, there is the market for the produce. In early days, corn and roots were grown in sufficient quantity for home consumption only, and the same may be said of the supply of meat. The wool of the sheep alone was carried to the markets to exchange for such necessaries of life as could not be obtained on the spot. Of recent years, the growth of large towns, including watering places, in the northern part of the county, has taken place to a degree sufficient to ensure the consumption of agricultural produce within the districts, and little is sent further afield. The following figures from the Journal of the Royal Agricultural Society for 1910 give the acreage devoted to the different corn crops, and the number of livestock in the whole of Lancashire. Figures for the northern part of the county are not available, but the proportions of the different crops and livestock given below are roughly applicable to the special district under consideration. Corn crops: wheat 19,757 acres, barley 4,427 acres, oats 83,786 acres. Livestock: cattle 227,416, sheep 324,484, pigs 69,932. Much of the sheep pasture, as already stated, is on the higher hills, which are largely occupied by the old slate rocks on the part north-west of Morecambe Bay, and by the millstone grit in the area south-east of Lancaster, though parts of the mountain limestone, with its sweet herbage, form excellent pasture. In the district north-west of Morecambe Bay, many of the sheep are of the Herdwick brand, of which tradition says that they escaped from a vessel of the Spanish Armada wrecked on the west coast of Cumberland, and thence gradually spread through the district. On the borderland between Lancashire and Yorkshire, where the formation is millstone grit, it is a very characteristic breed of sheep known as lonks, i.e. Lancashire sheep, which is often pronounced Lancashire. They are found on the fells south east of Lancaster about Roeburn Dale and the Trough of Bowland. The district is not one of pig breeders. Those pigs which are used for the consumption of the offal of the towns are brought from elsewhere. The cattle consist almost entirely of the large dairy shorthorns. These are used during the early part of their lives in making the famous Lancashire cheese. They are afterwards absorbed into the cowhouses of the intensive suburban farmers who supply milk from them and feed them out fat at the same time. These farmers are very characteristic of the districts around the larger centres of population. Everything produced on the farm is sold off. Their produce includes hay, straw, potatoes, and milk. A high state of fertility is nevertheless kept up by large purchases of manure and concentrated feeding stuff. One of the most interesting features of the district, from the agricultural point of view, is the great contrast in a small tract between the highly developed intensive farming of the lowlands around the large centres of population and the primitive farming of the tracts where the lonk sheep are reared. In the Fylde district, very large city dray horses of the Shire type are bred, and are mostly sent to Liverpool. In the lowlands a certain amount of arable land exists, especially within easy access of the larger towns. From the figures given it will be seen that the growth of wheat and barley almost entirely gives place to that of oats, and this is especially true of North Lancashire. Practically the whole of the wheat is grown for its straw. Of root crops we find in the intensive farm districts, in addition to the potatoes already mentioned, crops of mangolds and swedes, and a considerable amount of rough garden produce. Forestry is not very important in North Lancashire. In addition to trees grown for their timber are others for ornamental purposes, for game covert, and for shelter belts around hillside farmhouses. For the latter purpose the sycamore is an ideal tree, and one which thrives well here. The comparative lack of trees is partly due to poor soil and partly to exposure. Shelter is of more importance than soil alone, and we find trees growing profusely here and there in the cloughs and sheltered valleys. Even the millstone grit area, when covered with mild humus in the lower valleys and lower hillsides, grows very fine crops of deciduous trees and many conifers. The lowlands are comparatively treeless. Not only are these lowlands exposed, but much sea spray is very injurious, especially to evergreen plants when carried inland during gales. Climatic changes have certainly caused the diminution of tree-clad areas. In many of the upland peaty tracts, remains of former forests are seen, and the mild humus of these former forests has been replaced by an acid humus which is decidedly unfavourable to tree growth. In former days the forests of Quernmore and Upper Wyersdale were of importance. Chapter 16. Industries and Manufactures. Before treating of the more important industries, notice may be taken of a few minor ones which are extinct or dying out, but which are nevertheless of historic interest. They belong chiefly to the district north of the sands. The working of iron ore will be noticed in the next chapter. The old bloomeries or forges where iron was smelted will also be noticed in that chapter. The abundance of coppices in Furness and Cartmel especially is responsible for the utilisation of the wood for the manufacture of bobbins, baskets, and hoops, and charcoal burning is still carried on in those districts in connection with the manufacture of gunpowder. The coarse millstone grit of the fells east of Lancaster furnished material for the manufacture of handmills or querns. Quernmore, near Lancaster, takes its name from this now extinct industry. The manufacture of silk has greatly declined in the county. At the present time, the two chief industrial towns of North Lancashire are Preston and Barrow-in-Furness. Preston is a centre of the cotton industry, According to the census of 1901, there were 24,950 people in that town engaged upon it. The cotton trade of Lancashire is so important that we must say more about it, though apart from Preston it belongs to the southern part of the county. The manufacture of cotton is facilitated by the damp climate of the county, and has been carried on since the 16th century. The 18th century was marked by the Industrial Revolution, of which a most important cause was the introduction of steam power for driving machinery, and the factory system was substituted for the system of working in small houses. The two processes of spinning and weaving, which were more than once united, have now become separated for a variety of reasons, and while spinning is now extensively carried on in South Lancashire, weaving is mainly conducted in the towns immediately to the south of the Ribble and in Preston. According to the census returns of 1901, there were only 2,036,000 spindles employed in Preston, as against 57,900,000 looms. To give an idea of the importance of Lancashire from the point of view of the cotton trade, it may be mentioned that at the beginning of this century about 400,000 out of a total of nearly 500,000 cotton operatives employed in England and Wales worked in our county. Engineering and machine making are also carried on at Preston, and according to the same census employed 3,016 people. Barrow in Furness is especially connected with the steel trade. The small forges scattered about the Furness district disappeared as the result of improvements in the processes of smelting which came into use about the end of the 18th century, and the Bessemer process of steel manufacture, discovered in 1856, led to the formation of the great works at Barrow. The 1901 census showed that 1,765 people were engaged in the iron and steel manufacture. In the same town, 5,496 people were engaged in engineering and machine making. The introduction of iron shipbuilding in 1870 was a very important step as regards the prosperity of Barrow, and this industry now employs 10,300 men. The manufacture of guns is also an important industry in Barrow. Steel is also manufactured at Askham, Ulverston and Carnforth. Several industries are connected with the town of Lancaster, the most important being the manufacture of linoleum and oilcloth. The taking of fish is one of the great industries of the British Isles, but the fishing stations on the North Sea are much more important than those of the western coasts. Nevertheless, the capture of fish, especially if we include shellfish, around the coast of Morecambe Bay is very considerable. About 366 boats and 1,278 men are engaged in the fisheries of the North Lancashire coast. On the north side of the bay, the principal fishing ports are Barrow, Ulverston and Cark, but these are not of great importance except as regards cockles and shrimps. Morecambe is noted for its mussels, shrimps and flatfish. The best mussel beds lie between Morecambe and Heysham, on the tracts of stone or skiers which there abound. The so-called prawns of Morecambe Bay are not true prawns, and may be passed by with mere mention. The supply of cockles, mussels and shrimps, on the other hand, is very large. Cockles are obtained nearly all the year round, but chiefly in winter and spring. They are secured by means of a three-pronged iron fork attached to a wooden haft. This is known as a cockle cram. The mussels are obtained by means of a rake attached to a shaft 30 or 40 feet in length. This is a long cram. Fleetwood is the greatest of the Lancashire fishing ports, and is indeed one of the most important in England. There is much shrimp fishing at Lytham and St Anne's-on-Sea. Salmon are extensively caught in the larger rivers. Chapter 17. Mines and Quarries. The chief mines of North Lancashire are those which yield iron. They are situated in the Furness district, in the area composed of carboniferous limestone around Dalton and Lindale. The ore is an oxide of iron known as red hematite. occurring chiefly in fissures of the limestone. When these deposits were first worked is unknown, but scattered about along the lakesides and stream sides of High Furness are the remains of old smelting works, or bloomeries as they are termed, where the ore was reduced by means of charcoal. These bloomeries were erected where charcoal could be readily obtained, and in many cases also where water power was available. They occur on Peel Island, in Coniston Lake in Russland, on the shore of Windermere, and in 2 or 3 places in the Crake Valley. The old bloomery of Duddon Bridge still stands just outside the county on the Cumbrian side of the Duddon. This was in use at the end of the 18th century. The furnace at Backbarrow, below the foot of Windermere, is still at work. At Peel Island medieval remains have been found associated with the bloomery. In the latter part of the 13th century ore was certainly worked in connection with Furness Abbey, but the extraction and smelting of the ore on a large scale are comparatively recent. The General Report and Statistics published by the Home Office in 1908, which contains the latest official figures, states that the Furness district supplied 394,843 tons of iron ore in 1907, which ore contained 50% of available iron. The total value at the mines was £307,273, being 15 shillings 6 3/4 per ton. The ore was derived from the following localities: Askham and Dalton 15,294 tons, Elliscales 8,509 tons, Lindle Moor 56,154 tons, Newton 1,500 tons, Park 119,373 tons, Roanhead 194,013 tons, total 394,843 tons. Other ores which have been somewhat extensively worked in past times are those of lead and copper, though at the present day various causes have led to the decline of the mining of both these metals in the county. The lead ore, chiefly galena or lead sulphide, occurs in the Coniston Fells, where however copper mining was much more important. The working of the copper mines certainly began here in very remote times. The veins of these ores occur in the volcanic series of the Ordovician rocks. Copper ore was also worked in past times in the Carboniferous limestone rocks of Warton Crag. A thin seam of coal occurs at the Millstone Grit series east of Lancaster, and was once worked locally. Many good building stones are found in the northern part of the county. The rocks of the volcanic series are used locally for building stones in the neighbourhood of Coniston, and those of the Silurian rocks in High Furness. The Carboniferous limestone also is extensively used in those tracts where it occurs, and Millstone Grit is largely quarried in the southern part of the area. The town of Lancaster is mainly built of this stone. The new red sandstone is quarried near Barrow. Furness Abbey is built of it. Slate of a green colour is largely worked in a seam of the volcanic series, which runs from Little Langdale to the Duddon. The principal quarries are in Tilberthwaite, on Coniston Old Man, and at Walney Scar. Another band of slate on the higher Ordovician rocks is worked on Broughton Moor, and a more important band in the Silurian rocks is quarried on the same moor, and very extensively in the Kirkby quarries east of the Duddon estuary. Flagstones are obtained from some of the Silurian rocks of Furness, and also from some flaggy beds of the Millstone Grit of the fells east and south east of Lancaster. Clay for making bricks is obtained from some of the Millstone Grit shales. Lime is burnt in many places where the Carboniferous limestone is developed, and is used for various purposes. Rock salt is extracted from the new red sandstone at Preesall, and is used in the United Alkali Company's works at Fleetwood and elsewhere. The output is about 3,000 tons per week. Finally, peat for fuel is dug from the turbaries, or peat bogs on the higher hills in several places, and also on the flat mosses which are found on the low grounds bordering the estuaries and Morecambe Bay. Chapter 18. History of North Lancashire. The Roman occupation of Britain began with the visits of Julius Caesar in BC 55 and 54, but the Romans first arrived into what is now Lancashire territory under Agricola in AD 79. That event marks the beginning of the history of Lancashire, earlier events being regarded as belonging to the prehistoric period. For nearly 4 centuries the Romans dominated the district, with occasional raids by the Picts and Scots, and an insurrection of the Brigantes which was soon quelled. The Romans arrived from the south along the Lancashire plain, and probably after crossing the sands of Morecambe Bay marched across the flat tracts of Cartmel and Furness by the sea. They opened up the country by constructing an elaborate series of roads, which will be noticed subsequently, and they protected these by military camps at points of strategic importance. Under Agricola especially, the Brigantes were introduced to the civilization and luxury of the Roman conquerors. In addition to the military posts, many small towns and settlements arose in North Lancashire. In the 4th century the decline of the Roman Empire had begun, and at the beginning of the following century the Emperor Honorius gave to the Britons their independence. Shortly after the departure of the Romans, who were gradually leaving the country between 410 and 430, the English invasion began by the arrival of Teutonic peoples from the country near the Elbe. There were 3 Teutonic tribes dwelling near the Elbe, namely the Saxons around the mouth of that river, the Angles further north, and still further north the Jutes. All these people were termed English, and as they conquered portions of our country it in turn became English. By the end of the 6th century they had annexed the lowlands of England, the Jutes occupying Kent, the Saxons a tract north and west of Kent, and the Angles the centre, east and north east of England. All this time the North Lancashire area remained part of an independent British kingdom extending from the Dee to the Clyde, and bounded on the east by the Pennine Hills. The kingdom was called Strathclyde, and was divided into a series of smaller states, one or more of which included what is now North Lancashire. We know little of what went on in this region between the departure of the Romans and the arrival of the English, Danes and Norsemen, but there were in all probability dissensions among the different states. Some time after the Battle of Chester in 607, when Ethelfrith, King of Northumbria, defeated the British, North Lancashire became English. In the 9th and 10th centuries, invasions of the Danes and Norse from the north east and from over the sea took place, and these Northmen occupied considerable tracts, especially in Lancashire north of the sands, and in Amounderness, the plain north of the Ribble estuary. Obscure as are the events which happened between the departure of the Romans and the arrival of the Normans, their influence upon the inhabitants of the area was most marked. The people of the Brigantes had disappeared, the inhabitants had largely acquired their present characteristics, and the English language had become established. About the time of the Norman conquest, the North Lancashire district was laid waste. This may have been partly due to a struggle between Harold and Tostig in 1066, but also to William the Conqueror's devastation of the Northumbrian kingdom in 1069. About 1072, South Lancashire, then known as the land between Mersey and Ribble, with parts north of the latter river, was given by the Conqueror to Roger of Poitou, and William II granted more land north of the Ribble to him before 1094. Roger then held practically the whole of what is now Lancashire. In 1102, Roger forfeited this land to the crown, and Henry I granted it to Stephen. After Stephen came to the throne, David, King of Scotland, became possessed of Lancashire north of the Ribble, but it once again and finally became part of England in the reign of Henry II, when, as we have already stated, the county of Lancaster was definitely established. Little of importance took place in the county from this time until the 14th century. A Scottish raid in 1316 was unimportant, but in 1322 another raid was conducted with Bruce as leader, when the town and castle of Lancaster and the town of Preston were burnt. In 1349–50 our county, like the rest of England, suffered heavily from the Black Death. In 1351 Edward III conferred upon his cousin Henry the title Duke of Lancaster, and the Duchy of Lancaster therefore came into existence. He also conferred upon him the rights of a Palatine Earl. This made the county a County Palatine, a little kingdom in a sense within the English kingdom. After a lapse the dukedom was restored in 1362, and John of Gaunt, fourth son of Edward III, was created Duke. In 1377 he also obtained the Palatine rights. The county is still a County Palatine, and the reigning monarch Duke of Lancaster, though it must be remembered that the Duchy of Lancaster and the County of Lancashire are not the same thing. During the Wars of the Roses in the 15th century, the northern part of the county was not the scene of any important occurrence, but the contrary was the case during the Civil War in the time of Charles I. In 1643 the Parliamentarian forces took Preston and Lancaster, which were later retaken by the Royalists, and in 1648 the Scottish army entered England and was defeated by Cromwell at Preston, and subsequently in South Lancashire at Wigan and Warrington, after which the victorious army returned to London and demanded the punishment of the King, who was beheaded in the following year. North Lancashire was visited by the Pretender's troops in 1715, when, after some skirmishes near Preston, they surrendered to the King's forces, and in 1745 the troops of Charles Edward Stuart went southwards through Lancashire and retraced their steps northward during their precipitate retreat. Since then the history of the county is chiefly concerned with its industrial progress. Chapter 19. Antiquities: Prehistoric, Roman, Anglo-Saxon, Norse, Medieval. Our knowledge of the history of the inhabitants of Lancashire is chiefly derived from a study of written records, but it is not entirely dependent upon it, for relics of the early inhabitants afford information even of those periods of which records were made in writing. The part now forming the county of Lancashire was, however, inhabited in times earlier than those concerning which we have the first written records, and our knowledge of the state of the inhabitants during those early days is derived solely from an examination of relics left by them, either structures such as grave mounds and stone circles, or various weapons and other articles which have resisted decay and been preserved to the present day. The periods previous to those of the first written records are usually spoken of as prehistoric, and we will now consider the nature of the remains which have come down to us from these times. Before the use of metal for forming tools and weapons was discovered, these were chiefly of stone, and we are enabled therefore to divide prehistoric time into the Stone Age and the prehistoric Metal Age. We will begin with the earlier of these ages, that of stone. Antiquaries have found that there are two very different classes of stone implements, marking two quite distinct ages of civilization, of which the latter was far more advanced than the earlier. We speak therefore of the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age, and the Neolithic or New Stone Age. In the older age the implements were formed by chipping the stone into shape, and the art of grinding and polishing them was unknown. Instruments of this type are found in the river gravels and caverns of England as far north as Derbyshire, but are unknown in the northerly parts, including Lancashire. We need not therefore dwell further upon the remains of the older Stone Age. Several implements of the later or Neolithic age have been found in the northern part of the county. Among them are celts, stones which have been chipped and ground into the form of a broad chisel with a sharp cutting edge at the broader end. They are often polished, and were probably used as hatchets. Other types are perforated hammers and hammer axes, which have been found in various parts of Furness and at Claughton near Garstang. It is not to be supposed that all the stone implements found in this region necessarily belong to the Stone Age, for stone was used long after the introduction of metal, and has indeed been in use quite recently for some purposes, as for instance the striker light used for igniting tinder. There are very few structures in the county which were of certainty made by men of the Stone Age, for there is much difficulty in distinguishing the relics of this age from that of the succeeding period. Barrows or burial mounds, often largely made of stones, exist. Of these barrows there are two types, the long and the round barrows. The long barrows belong to the early Neolithic period, and the round barrows to a later period. Where stone is abundant, cairns were often erected instead of barrows. From study of the relics of the later Stone Age found in other places, we know that the English dwellers of this age were hunters and fishermen, possessing domestic animals, and having some knowledge of agriculture. They were also acquainted with the art of making rude pottery. The introduction of metal was certainly gradual, and long after objects formed of metal were introduced, stone no doubt continued to be the principal material from which implements were fashioned. The first metal to be used for the purpose was not iron, but the alloy of copper and tin which we call bronze, for the art of smelting iron was much more difficult than that of making bronze. Accordingly, the earlier prehistoric age of metal was a Bronze Age. At first the Bronze Age men imitated the stone implements which were in use, and a large number of the bronze instruments are more or less modified forms of the hatchet-shaped stone instrument, but the introduction of metal allowed of the formation of a far greater variety of forms than could be fashioned in stone, and in our county, besides the hatchet-shaped forms, bronze dagger-like weapons and spears have been discovered. A hoard of these bronze weapons was found at Winmarleigh. Some of the men of the Bronze Age dwelt in caves, and remains of this period have been found in Kirkhead Cave near Cartmel. The county is rich in prehistoric structures besides the barrows already mentioned. Some of these structures may belong to the Neolithic period, while others are certainly of the Bronze Age. Of the so-called Druidical circles, which have of course nothing to do with the Druids, we may mention a double circle on Birkrigg Common east of Great Urswick. Remains of settlements of prehistoric tribes are also frequent. Various camps and earthworks of pre-Roman date also occur, one of the most remarkable being that on the summit of Warton Crag. Another is on Pennington Hill near Ulverston. Circles, cairns, and the remains of settlements are found on the slopes of the Coniston Hills, on Birkrigg Common, and at Urswick near Ulverston. There is evidence that iron had been introduced into Britain before the arrival of the Romans into our island, and a few relics found in North Lancashire have been assigned to this early Iron Age. We may now proceed to consider the relics of the Roman occupation of our land. In so doing we pass definitely from prehistoric to historic times. Of the Roman roads we shall speak elsewhere, and at the same time refer to the most important of the Roman camps. The chief Roman relics of small size consist of pottery of very artistic types, some of which was made in Britain, though a large part was imported from the continent, especially from Gaul. There are also many and various ornaments, and a large number of Roman coins, which have been found in several places. Many inscribed stones have been discovered. A Roman milestone was found at Caton, and altars at Ribchester. The Roman sites at Overborough, Lancaster, and Ribchester, to be noticed more fully in a subsequent chapter, have yielded a very large number of Roman remains. There are many relics belonging to the period between the departure of the Romans and the arrival of the Normans, the most interesting of which are sculptured stones. Some of these are of Anglo-Saxon origin, while others show Norse influence. Of Anglo-Saxon relics we may notice a silver cup and other objects found at Halton, and some bronze brooches unearthed at Claughton. Many pre-Norman crosses exist. Several have been found at Lancaster, others at Bolton-le-Sands, Hornby, Heysham and Halton. Some of these show Norse work. One at Halton is of interest as marking, according to some authorities, the replacing of pagan worship by the Christian religion. The curious procumbent tombstones, known as hogbacks, belong to this period. One was found at Bolton-le-Sands, and a beautiful specimen exists in that remarkable collection of pre-Norman relics, the churchyard at Heysham. Of possible Norman age are certain mounds, usually surrounded by ditches, and often having courts or baileys attached. They are usually on low ground near rivers or the sea. In the Lune valley they are found at Whittington, Arkholme, Melling, Hornby, Halton, Lancaster, and on the Ribble at Preston. A very large example at Aldingham is on the coast. Medieval remains other than buildings are of no great interest. Examples of the rough pottery characteristic of the period are frequently unearthed. Coins and tokens seem to have been struck at Lancaster at various times between the reign of Henry II and the end of the 18th century. The illustration shows the last of these tokens, known as the Lancaster penny.
End of chapters 15 to 19. Chapters 20 to 25 of North Lancashire, Cambridge County Geographies by J. E. Marr.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. Architecture. A. General. It will be convenient to consider under these headings the ecclesiastical, military and domestic buildings of the county. Before doing so, however, we may offer some observations on the edifices in general. We may remark at the outset that here, as elsewhere, the buildings are affected by the nature of the materials available, local stone being mainly used. Thus in the area of the Ordovician rocks, stones of that age are chiefly seen. In the Carboniferous tracts, the limestones and sandstones belonging to that geological system have been employed. These Carboniferous rocks, and especially the sandstones, form the main building materials in our area. A preliminary word on the various styles of English architecture is necessary before we consider the churches and other important buildings of our county. Pre-Norman, or, as it is usually, though with no great certainty termed, Saxon building in England, was the work of early craftsmen with an imperfect knowledge of stone construction, who commonly used rough rubble walls, no buttresses, small semicircular or triangular arches, and square towers, with what is termed long and short work at the quoins or corners. It survives almost solely in portions of small churches. The Norman conquest started a widespread building of massive churches and castles in the continental style called Romanesque, which in England has got the name of Norman. They had walls of great thickness, semicircular vaults, round-headed doors and windows, and massive square towers. From 1150 to 1200 the building became lighter, the arches pointed, and there was perfected the science of vaulting, by which the weight is brought upon piers and buttresses. This method of building, the Gothic, originated from the endeavour to cover the widest and loftiest areas with the greatest economy of stone. The first English Gothic, called Early English, from about 1180 to 1250, is characterized by slender piers, commonly of marble, lofty pointed vaults, and long narrow lancet-headed windows. After 1250 the windows became broader, divided up, and ornamented by patterns of tracery, while in the vault the ribs were multiplied. The greatest elegance of English Gothic was reached from 1260 to 1290, at which date English sculpture was at its highest, and art in painting, coloured glass-making, and general craftsmanship at its zenith. After 1300 the structure of stone buildings began to be overlaid with ornament. The window tracery and vault ribs were of intricate patterns, the pinnacles and spires loaded with crocket and ornament. This later style is known as decorated, and came to an end with the Black Death, which stopped all building for a time. With the changed conditions of life, the type of building changed. With curious uniformity and quickness, the style called Perpendicular, which is unknown abroad, developed after 1360 in all parts of England, and lasted with scarcely any change up to 1520. As its name implies, it is characterized by the perpendicular arrangement of the tracery and panels on walls and in windows, and it is also distinguished by the flattened arches and the square arrangement of the mouldings over them, by the elaborate vault traceries, especially fan vaulting, and by the use of flat roofs and towers without spires. The medieval styles in England ended with the dissolution of the monasteries 1530 to 1540, for the Reformation checked the building of churches. There succeeded the building of manor houses, in which the style called Tudor arose, distinguished by flat-headed windows, level ceilings, and panelled rooms. The ornaments of classic style were introduced under the influences of Renaissance sculpture, and distinguished the Jacobean style, so called after James I. About this time the professional architect arose. Hitherto building had been entirely in the hands of the builder and the craftsman. There is one character which is common to many of the buildings of the county, whether ecclesiastical, military, or domestic, and as it is one of particular geographical import it must be noticed. North Lancashire, not far from the borders, has witnessed much fighting, and has been the scene of raids. Consequently other edifices than those erected exclusively for military purposes required fortifying. The quadrangular tower, the nucleus of the Norman fortification, served as the pattern for other fortified buildings, and accordingly the tower of this type forms a noteworthy feature of many ecclesiastical and domestic buildings. Chapter 21. Architecture. B. Ecclesiastical churches and religious houses. The ecclesiastical buildings of North Lancashire include the churches and the religious houses. Many of the churches have undergone much restoration, and although in some cases the ancient character has been preserved during the process, in too many it has been completely destroyed. We may give examples of various ecclesiastical buildings which illustrate the different styles of architecture. Of pre-Norman buildings we have no large examples such as are found in other parts of the country, but certain very interesting remains are found in the promontory which lies south of Morecambe, between the bay and the estuary of the Lune. In this promontory, far from the lines of main traffic until quite recently, we may well expect that buildings which if situated elsewhere would have been destroyed would escape the hands of the spoiler. Parts of the fabric of St. Peter's Church, Heysham, have been claimed as pre-Norman. It is marked by thick walls with hard mortar and stones built in somewhat irregularly. The church contains a narrow round-headed doorway. The most interesting relic of the times of which we speak is, however, the little chapel of St. Patrick, which stands on the cliff near St. Peter's Church. It was but 24 feet long and 8 feet wide. Only the west walls and part of the south side are now standing. In the latter are remains of a window, and a narrow doorway surmounted by a semicircular arch formed of a single stone ornamented with semicircular flutings. The Norman period is represented by some interior work and several doorways. In Cartmel Priory the pillars of the interior supporting the tower are of this date, as are also the arches inside Hawkshead Church and those of the south aisle of Aldingham Church. Doorways of Norman architecture may be seen in the churches of Ulverston, Broughton-in-Furness, Kirkby Ireleth and Overton. Examples of the style of the period of transition from Norman to Gothic are found in the small church of Stid near Ribchester, which is 18 yards long and 9 yards broad, and in the church of Furness Abbey, which was chiefly built at this time, though it underwent many subsequent alterations. The doorway of the north transept of that church illustrates this period of transition. The early English period is represented by some of the buildings of Furness Abbey, The chapter house furnishes admirable examples. The windows in the north transept of Cartmel Priory, the doorways at Gressingham, and the south door of Styd Church may be quoted as examples of this period. Various minor examples of the Decorated period are found. Some beautiful decorated windows have unfortunately been removed from Urswick Church, but are preserved in a garden at Hawkshead. The infirmary of Furness Abbey is of this period, but some of the best representatives of decorated architecture are found in Cartmel Priory. Special mention may be made of the beautiful windows in the south aisle of the chancel, as good examples of a special style of late decorated work. Much Perpendicular work is found throughout our district. A great part of Lancaster parish church is in this style. Better examples are various windows in the church of Furness Abbey, much of Aldingham and Wharton churches, the towers of Hornby and Bolton le Sands, and windows in the transepts, nave and Piper choir of Cartmel Priory. Let us now turn to the religious houses, some of which have been mentioned to illustrate styles of architecture. Of abbeys the principal was the great establishment of Furness, whose monastic buildings are situated in a secluded valley not far from the southern end of the Furness peninsula. It was founded by monks of the Benedictine order in 1127, but in 1148 became a Cistercian abbey. The abbot was a person of great importance, and was chief lord of the liberties and royalties of Furness. In addition to most of the lands of Furness, the abbey erected and possessed many buildings, as the manor house at Hawkshead Hall and the castle at Peel. It had much cultivated land, forests, hunting grounds, and fisheries. The abbey was surrendered to Henry VIII in 1537. Among the existing portions of the abbey are remains of the church, and of other conventual buildings the chapter house, fratry, infirmary, and part of the abbot's house still exist. Cockersand Abbey, situated just south of the Lune estuary, was founded at the end of the 12th century on the site of a pre-existing hospital, as a house of the Premonstratensian monks. Of the buildings, the octagonal chapter house alone remains. The Cistercian Abbey of Wyersdale was an offshoot of Furness Abbey, and was founded towards the end of the 12th century. Its actual site is unknown. Priories existed at Lancaster, Cartmel, Conishead, Hornby, and Cockerham. St Mary's Priory, Lancaster, was the first religious house in Lancashire. It was founded by Roger of Poitou in the reign of William II. The monks were of the Premonstratensian order. No remains of this priory now exist. Cartmel Priory was founded in 1188 by the Earl of Pembroke as a priory of Augustinian canons, but a church stood here before the foundation of the priory. Reference has already been made to the existing priory church. Conishead Priory, on the west side of the Leven estuary, was founded by Gabriel de Pennington in the reign of Henry II as a hospital for lepers and poor persons, but was soon converted into a priory of the Augustinian monks. No remains of the priory now stand, and the present building of that name is a modern erection. Hornby Priory was a cell belonging to the Premonstratensian Abbey of Croxton in Leicestershire. A few sculptured stones are still found in the grounds of the priory farm. The Augustinian Priory of Cockerham was established in 1207 or 1208. No remains of the building are left standing. The site of a Franciscan friary stands about half a mile from Preston Market Place, and that of a Benedictine monastery at Tulketh near Preston on the north side of the Ribble. Chapter 22. Architecture.
C.
Military and other castles. The division into military, ecclesiastical, and domestic architecture is, for North Lancashire, somewhat arbitrary. Several of the castles were not strictly speaking military, though designed for defence, but this was also the case with many of the manor houses, and even ecclesiastical buildings in the troublous borderland were to some extent fortified. Lancaster Castle was in a strict sense a military castle, and it is by far the most important of the castles of North Lancashire. In the first place, let us consider the natural advantages of its site. The Normans were quick to seize upon sites which possessed such advantages, though, as in the present case, they frequently chose places which the Romans, with their genius for the selection of strategic positions, had previously occupied. Standing on the high ground on which the castle is built, one looks eastward over the high moorlands which stretch away towards the Pennines, and to the west are the flats of the Lancashire plain, which at no distant date were a network of mosses and marshlands. Between highland and marshland the great route to the north lay, and crossed the Lune over the shallows. Overlooking these shallows is the northern end of a ridge which lies between a little valley, in which most of the modern town of Lancaster stands, and the low ground of the Lune to the north west. Upon this northern end the castle was erected. The Norman castles, as first built, consisted of quadrangular towers or keeps. Subsequent additions were made to the castles in the form of a wall with subsidiary towers surrounding the ward or inner space on which stood the keep, while other subsidiary buildings might be erected in this ward. The castle was apparently built so that about half lay within and half without the old Roman wall. The keep was erected by Roger of Poitou before 1102, and it is the only part of the castle which has retained anything like its original appearance. Of the present buildings, much of the surrounding wall with its towers is modern, but parts of older buildings still stand. The great entrance gateway was probably built early in the 15th century. It contains windows of Perpendicular style of architecture. To the south of the keep is a tower known popularly as Adrian's Tower. It has a modern exterior, but inside it is some work showing the style of the period transitional between the Norman and the early English styles, and probably dating from before 1200. The old dungeon tower is now destroyed, but the interior of the well tower north of the gateway has some transitional work. The upper part of the keep was rebuilt in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Long after Norman times the castle was of importance in connection with the frequent raids and guerrilla wars conducted by the Scotch borderers. It was ultimately used as a prison, but even in this state important events are connected with it, including the imprisonment of the Lancashire witches before their execution in 1612, and of George Fox, the founder of the Society of Friends, in 1664. Peel Castle, or the Pile of Fouldry, situated on an island at the southern extremity of the Furness Peninsula, was built by the monks of Furness Abbey in Stephen's reign, as a protection against raiders from Scotland. It was repaired and strengthened in the 14th century. The existing portions are part of the keep, and remains of inner and outer walls which once enclosed the keep. 4 towers of the inner wall stand, one of which is a gate tower, and there are 3 towers of the outer wall. Lambert Simnel landed here in 1487. The other castles were built by members of important Lancashire families. Gleaston Castle, near Aldingham, in the Furness Peninsula, is said to have been erected by the Harringtons. The date of erection is unknown, but its style points to the early part of the 14th century. Little now remains. Hornby Castle, on a hill overlooking the Lune and Wenning, about 9 miles above Lancaster, is first mentioned in 1362. The chief event connected with it occurred when it belonged to the Stanleys, the attack by the Scotch in 1513. Little of the old edifice is left. Thurland Castle, the seat of the Tunstals, is a few miles higher up the Lune. The original building was erected in the reign of Henry IV, but the existing edifice is almost wholly modern. Greenhalgh Castle, close to Garstang, was built by the Earl of Derby in 1490 for the protection of his estates. It was held for the king by a later earl in 1643, and was afterwards almost completely destroyed by Cromwell. A fragment only remains. Dalton Castle may be mentioned as a building uniting in some respects the characteristics of the castle and the Peel Tower. Its early history is unknown. Chapter 23. architecture D, domestic, manor houses, cottages. In many parts of our district there has been an extensive erection of modern buildings with varied styles of architecture. With these we are not so much concerned, but shall consider more particularly the ancient buildings which present certain features typical of this part of the country. The more ancient dwellings may be divided into two classes: the manor houses of the lords of the manor and the cottages of the peasants. The more interesting manor houses were built between the 14th and the 17th centuries. The characteristic feature of these is the peel tower, rendered necessary for a people liable to raids. It originally constituted the whole dwelling. These towers were modelled on the keeps of the Norman castles. They were rectangular and usually 3-storied. In the lower story were kept stores. The inhabitants occupied the middle one by day and slept in the upper one by night. The roof was used for fighting purposes when raiders had to be repelled. The peel tower stood in an enclosure called the barmkin, surrounded by a wall. Into this barmkin the cattle were driven when raids were feared. In later times dining halls and other additions were built out from the peel tower. Raysholme Tower, 1 mile from Kent's Bank, and Broughton Tower at Broughton-in-Furness are examples of peel towers, and the tower at Borwick Hall near Carnforth is modified from an earlier peel tower. Of other Tudor houses we may mention Swarthmoor Hall, about 1 mile from Ulverston, whither George Fox arrived in 1652, and with which he was connected for about 30 years. Marsh Grange on the east side of the Duddon estuary near the Isle of Dunnerholme, built to serve as a residence for people employed by the Abbot of Furness, and the birthplace of Margaret Askew, afterwards married to George Fox. Kirkby Hall near Kirkby Isleth, Coniston Hall by the shores of Coniston Lake, and Claughton Hall on the banks of the Lune between Caton and Hornby. It has been seen that, after the Reformation, church building was checked, and that, as far as ecclesiastical architecture is concerned, there is little to be said about the North Lancashire buildings of the Renaissance period. It is otherwise, however, with the manor houses, which continued to be set up during this period. Many of them were erected in an L shape, and the peel tower disappeared. The classic influence is displayed in many of the details of these buildings. As examples of the houses of the Renaissance period we may notice Cark Hall in the south end of the Cartmel peninsula, a fair example of an old manor house, and High Satterhow near Sorey between Windermere and Esthwaite. Much of the structure of Borwick Hall is also Jacobean. The view of Graythwaite Old Hall on the south-west side of Windermere will give an idea of the appearance of the interior of an ancient manor house. Many modern buildings retain relics of ancient manor houses, as for instance Ashton Hall south of Lancaster, the seat of Lord Ashton, and Thurnham Hall south of this, where the old priest hole still exists. The earlier cottages of the peasants were usually built of rough stone, often without mortar. They generally had 3 rooms on the ground floor, a sitting room and kitchen combined, a parlour and a dairy. Stone steps, sometimes outside the house, led to a loft or sleeping room. Various modifications naturally occur. Chapter 24. Communications, past and present, roads, railways, canals. Study of the map at the beginning of this book will show that the principal lines of communication, whether road, rail, or canal, are chiefly confined to the lower grounds. This is due to 2 things. Firstly, the principal towns and villages are situated upon the low grounds, and secondly, unless a very roundabout line is required to avoid high ground, the roads and railways will be carried from place to place along the lowlands. Occasionally a route must traverse high ground, and then a pass is usually utilised, as for instance that of the Trough of Bowland, at a height of about 1,000 feet, through which lies the direct route between Lancaster and Clitheroe. This pass has hills from 400 to 500 feet above it on either side. The pre-Roman inhabitants of North Lancashire like latter-day barbarians of other countries, no doubt possessed an intricate network of paths connecting hamlet with hamlet. Such paths would be kept open through the undergrowth of the lowlands, and would in some cases extend over higher ridges. Having no definite construction, those subsequently abandoned would tend to disappear, while those which continued in use would show no signs of their formation during pre-Roman days. The Romans were great road makers. Portions of their roads yet exist, for they were often carefully constructed of stones, and were therefore more durable than those of much later times. The principal Roman roads met at the station of Ribchester, the road from the south of England coming through the Roman town of Mancunium, Manchester, here crossed the Ribble and entered North Lancashire. It was continued northward over Longridge Fell and up the valley of the Hodder, crossing the fells of the Forest of Bowland near Bolton Head at a height of about 1,500 feet above sea level. It then passed northward on the right bank of the Hindbourne, crossed the Wenning near Bentham, and entering the valley of the Lune, reached the Roman station at Overborough near Kirkby Lonsdale, after which it entered Westmoreland and went away to Carlisle and Scotland. From Ribchester 3 other roads left this main north road. One went a little north of east across the Pennines to the Roman station at Ilkley, and so communicated with the important district of the Plain of York. This soon crossed the Ribble, and so quitted what is now North Lancashire. In the opposite direction a road was carried to a Roman seaport, which stood on the north side of the Ribble estuary at the Neb of the Nees, or Naze Mount, near Freckleton, to the west of Preston. A third road extended in a direction west of north over the western end of Longridge Fell, and passing along the junction of high and low ground reached Lancaster. From Lancaster another road went up the Lune valley and joined that first described at Overborough. From Overborough a road ran south-eastward into Yorkshire, but this soon quitted Lancashire soil. An early Roman route seems to have left Lancashire to cross the sands of Morecambe Bay and pass along the coast of Cartmel and Furness, thence crossing Duddon Sands into Cumberland, and so around the Cumbrian coast to Carlisle. Lastly, a road leaving the Roman station at the head of Windermere went westward over Wrynose Pass near the line of the county boundary, and entering Cumberland ended at the Roman port at Ravenglass. From the time of the Romans to the early part of the 19th century, when macadam caused a return to the use of stone foundations, the roads of Britain were very bad, and much difficulty was experienced in getting from place to place. The introduction of the method of formation of roads due to macadam was necessitated by the rapid development of stagecoach travelling about that time. Of the modern roads we need say little, for those of importance are indicated on the maps on the covers. The great artery of road traffic extends from Preston to Lancaster, where it branches, one branch going along the low ground to Kendal and northward over the fells, the other up the Vale of Lune past Kirkby Lonsdale to join the former on Shap Fells in Westmoreland. The first Lancashire railway was that between Manchester and Liverpool, opened in 1830, but it was not until 1844 to 1846 that the railway came into that part of the county with which we are concerned. In these years the Lancaster and Carlisle Railway was made. Nowadays 4 important railway companies have lines in the northern part of the county, namely the London and North Western, Midland, Furness, and Lancashire and Yorkshire. The main line of the London and North Western system enters the north of the county at Preston, and running northward through Lancaster leaves the county north of Carnforth. From Garstang a line owned by a separate company runs via Pilling to Knott End. From Lancaster, branches of the London and North Western Railway are carried to Glasson Dock and Morecambe. The Midland Railway enters the county near Wennington and runs down the Lune valley to Lancaster, Morecambe and Heysham. The Lancaster and Heysham portion is electrified. A joint line of the Midland and Furness companies connects Wennington with Carnforth. The Furness line starts from Carnforth and extends along the north coast of Morecambe Bay through Ulverston and Barrow-in-Furness to Foxfield Junction, where it enters Cumberland. Branch lines go to Lakeside, Windermere, and Conishead Priory from Ulverston, to Peel Pier from Barrow, and to Coniston from Foxfield Junction. The Lancashire and Yorkshire and London and North Western companies have joint lines between Preston, Blackpool and Fleetwood, Preston, Lytham and St Anne's-on-Sea, and Preston and Longridge, and a line also connects Blackpool with Lytham. An electric tramway runs parallel with the coast between Blackpool and Fleetwood, and similar tramways run in the larger towns. The Preston and Kendal Canal passes through Lancaster and leaves the county near Burton in Westmorland. A branch extends to Glasson Dock. Packet boats for passengers began to run on this canal in 1820, but have long been discontinued. A short canal connects Ulverston with Morecambe Bay. Chapter 25. Administration and Divisions, Ancient and Modern. It has been seen that Lancashire is of late date as compared with most other English counties. Before the formation of the county, various divisions existed for administrative purposes. Thus we find in Domesday Book that South Lancashire is treated with Cheshire and North Lancashire with Yorkshire, and before those shires were created, other divisions must have existed. In the early days of tribes, administration was no doubt at first mainly a family affair, and later an affair of clans, but as the tracts of land under one ruler increased, it was necessary to make divisions of the tracts, in each of which administration of some of its affairs was local, and accordingly the administration by families and clans was replaced by a territorial one. The early Saxon shires of the south, each probably the result of expansion outwards of a definite colony, formed convenient territorial areas for administrative purposes, and under the Normans those areas which had not thus been parcelled out were formed into counties. Hence the existence of the county of Lancashire for similar purposes. The Saxons had ealdremen or governors who appointed deputies called sheriffs, shire reeves, reeve being equivalent to our word steward. The inferior people were partly ceorls or freemen, and partly villeins who were labourers in the service of particular persons, and not strictly slaves. Upon the establishment of the feudal system by the Normans, many of the Saxon laws and customs were retained, as was also the old distinction of classes. Thus there were counts or earls, barons, knights, esquires, free tenants, and villeins. William the Conqueror bestowed the district upon Roger of Poitou, who ruled it as a count, and divided portions of it among his followers. The system of local government necessitated the division of the county into minor tracts for administrative purposes. It was separated into hundreds, which are supposed to have been so called because each originally contained 100 families or freemen. Of these there are 6, of which 2 are in North Lancashire, namely Lonsdale, north and south of the Sands, and Amounderness. A further division was made into parishes, each with its own officials, and the parishes were again divided into townships or constable-wicks. As the shire had its sheriff, so the parish had its own special reeve or presiding official. The gradual accumulation of numbers of people in restricted areas gave rise to towns, and necessitated special government in the case of these towns apart from that exercised by the constable of an ordinary constable-wick with his subordinates. The powers of government of a corporate town are granted by a royal charter, and the first charter possessed by the town of Lancaster is dated 1193. The administrative powers of those responsible for the government of the town were altered by many subsequent charters, and the town is now governed by a corporation of 32 members, including the mayor, 8 of whom are aldermen. Other corporate towns of North Lancashire are Barrow-in-Furness, Blackpool, Morecambe, and Preston. Barrow, being a town of modern growth, only obtained its charter of incorporation in 1867. The corporation, like that of Lancaster, consists of a mayor, 8 aldermen, and 24 councillors. Blackpool received its charter in 1876. There are 48 members of council, of whom 12 are aldermen. Morecambe is a town of modern growth. It obtained its charter in 1902. There are 24 members of council, of whom 6 are aldermen. Preston, like Lancaster, was a corporate town in early days, a charter having been granted in 1179. There are 36 members of council, of whom 12 are aldermen. When the county was first constituted, its voice in the general affairs of the nation was slight. When the Great Charter was signed in 1215, one of its provisions was that its articles were to be carried out by knights from each shire chosen in the county court. Thus the influence of the county in national affairs became more direct. In 1295 the first complete Parliament assembled, and besides others 2 knights were summoned from each shire, 2 citizens from each city, and 2 burgesses from each borough. Since then the county has had full share in the government of the nation, and after many changes the northern part of the county is now represented by 6 members of Parliament chosen by the burgesses of the following divisions and boroughs: the Blackpool division 1 member, Lancaster division 1 member, North Lonsdale division 1 member, Borough of Barrow-in-Furness 1 member, Borough of Preston 2 members. Let us turn now to the present government of the county, which has gradually grown out of the old administrative system. The head officer of the county is the Lord Lieutenant, who in some ways represents his Norman predecessor, who under the title of Count, Earl, or other name, was at the head of affairs. The Lord Lieutenant represents the Crown in the county, and one of his duties is to nominate all deputy lieutenants and justices of the peace. The High Sheriff of today is to some extent representative of the Norman Sheriff, although his duties are much restricted in comparison with those of the ancient officer, and are chiefly connected with the affairs of the law. He is keeper of the King's peace within the county, and he attends the judges of the realm when on circuit. A recently constituted body with purely administrative functions is the County Council. It consists of a chairman, vice-chairman, aldermen, and elected councillors. The county is divided into a large number of electoral districts, each of which returns a councillor. From these are chosen the aldermen. Among its functions are the management of county halls and buildings, pauper lunatic asylums, bridges and main roads, the appointment of certain officers such as coroners, the control of parliamentary polling districts, and contagious diseases of animals. The county council are also the local education authorities through an education committee. There are also rural district, urban and parish councils for the administration of smaller areas of the county. Of the public schools in the county, the best known are Rossall School, Stonyhurst College, and Lancaster Grammar School, to which reference is made elsewhere. For purposes of justice, the northern part of the county has assizes which are held at Lancaster, quarter sessions presided over by a chairman of quarter sessions, and also a number of petty sessions, each having justices of the peace whose duty it is to try and to punish offenders against the law. Civil cases are tried in the county court, over which a special judge presides. North Lancashire before 1847 was in the diocese of Chester. In that year the diocese of Manchester was created, the greater part of North Lancashire being included, but the following parishes in the tract north of the sands are in the diocese of Carlisle: Hawkshead, Cartmel, and Colton, with their dependent ecclesiastical parishes; Aldingham and Dalton, with dependent parishes; Kirkby Ireleth, Pennington, Ulverston, and Urswick. The dioceses are divided into archdeaconries, these into rural deaneries, and these still further into ecclesiastical parishes, which are not the same as the civil parishes.
End of chapters 20 to 25. Chapters 26 to 27 of North Lancashire, Cambridge County Geographies by J. E. Marr.
This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 26 Roll of Honour. Foremost among those who have done honour to their county must be placed the great families of whom individuals have through the centuries been prominent for promoting the welfare and directing the affairs of the county, and in many cases rendering important services to the country. It would clearly be impossible in a small work on geography to mention the numerous services of the different individuals of these families, and we must be content to make this general reference. Special mention must however be made of William Cavendish, 7th Duke of Devonshire, 1808 to 1891, to whom the development of Barrow-in-Furness owes so much. He helped to establish the industries of iron mining and steel production, and was a great breeder of shorthorns, the herd at Holker having had in its time a very wide reputation. The selection of notable men is difficult. No two writers would agree as to the list of worthies to be placed in the roll of honour. In 3 cases, names have been included of men who were not born in the county, for to the geographer the accident of birth is not of so great importance as the selection of the county for residence on account of particular advantages which it may offer, or because the district is favourable for the work to be done. We will begin with 3 ecclesiastics in the order of their birth. Edwin Sandys, 1516 to 1588, was probably born at Hawkshead. He became Archbishop of York in 1575 or 1576. He was one of the translators of the Bishop's Bible, and founded the grammar school at Hawkshead. A very different man was William Allen, 1532 to 1594, who was born at Rossall, and ultimately became a cardinal. He was a strong supporter of the Roman Catholic religion, and was one of those who urged the King of Spain to invade England. He was also author of many works. Edmund Law, 1703 to 1787, born in the parish of Cartmel, was a writer of many theological works and became Bishop of Carlisle. Lancaster may be proud of having produced 3 distinguished men of science. William Whewell, 1794 to 1866, a voluminous writer on many subjects, possessed too varied knowledge to show much originality in any one subject. He was Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and his reputation rests chiefly on the influence he exerted upon his university, especially as regards its studies. Sir Richard Owen, 1804 to 1892, was recognised throughout Europe as the first anatomist of his day. He published a vast amount in connection with his subject, much of it being of permanent value. He was also chiefly responsible for the development of the British Museum of Natural History, of which he became director. Sir Edward Frankland,
1825 to 1899,
was a distinguished chemist, specially noted for the value of his contributions to organic chemistry. The same town produced Henry Cort, 1740 to 1800, whose discoveries, including the substitution of coal for charcoal in converting pig iron into wrought iron, had a most important effect upon the iron trade. Sir Richard Arkwright, 1732 to 1792, was born at Preston. He was an inventor of machinery as a substitute for hand labour in textile manufactures, and his invention, the spinning jenny, is known to everyone. His first machine was set up at Preston, but he afterwards moved into Derbyshire. Sir John Barrow, 1764 to 1848, born at Dragley Beck near Ulverston, may claim to be the founder of the Royal Geographical Society. He was secretary to the Admiralty, and is specially noted as a promoter of Arctic exploration. His monument on Hode Hill near Ulverston is a conspicuous landmark. One great artist hails from North Lancashire, namely George Romney, 1734 to 1802. He was born at Beckside near Dalton-in-Furness, the son of a builder and cabinet maker. In addition to being one of the most distinguished of English portrait painters, he trained others, among whom was James Lonsdale, 1777 to 1839, born in Lancaster. Of men born elsewhere who had much influence in our area, mention may be made of George Fox, William Wordsworth, and John Ruskin. George Fox, 1624 to 1691, founder of the Society of Friends, was born in Leicestershire, but much of his work was done in North Lancashire. He married Margaret Fell, widow of Thomas Fell of Swarthmoor Hall near Ulverston, and spent many years there, building and endowing its meeting house. On several occasions he suffered imprisonment for his zeal, being confined in Lancaster Castle among other places. William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850, was born in Cumberland, but much of his poetry is descriptive of the hilly district of North Lancashire. Great as a poet, he must also be regarded as one who has claims among the worthies of our county, for the recognition of the Lake District as a place of beauty owes much to his writings. John Ruskin, 1819 to 1900, born in London, author, artist, and social reformer, also wrote of the district, which he loved so well that he spent the last years of his life there. He has many references to those Coniston hills, among which nestles Brantwood, and where in the churchyard of Coniston his remains now lie. Chapter 27. The chief towns and villages of North Lancashire. The figures in brackets give the population in 1901. A population of about 1,000 is taken as admitting a place into this list, though a few urban districts with a greater population but having no large village are omitted, while a few places of small population but presenting features of interest are inserted. The figures at the end of each section are references to the pages in the text. Aldingham. Population 1072. A village on the south-east side of the Furness Peninsula, 5 miles east of Barrow-in-Furness and 4 miles south of Ulverston. The church has some Norman arches inside, and its tower is of decorated and perpendicular work. The Moat Hill, possibly the site of a Norman settlement, stands by the seashore, a short distance to the south of the village. The ruins of Gleaston Castle are about 2 miles west of Aldingham. Barrow-in-Furness, County Borough. Population 57,586. Provisional figures for 1911, 63,775. A county and parliamentary borough and port, is situated at the south-western end of the Furness Peninsula, opposite to Walney Island, onto which it is now extending. Its rise has been very rapid. At the beginning of last century it was non-existent, and on the early ordnance maps the smallest type was used for the name Barrow, indicating that it was then a mere hamlet. In 1837 the population was 100. Its rise was largely due to the 7th Duke of Devonshire. The town occupies a considerable area of the mainland, and extends over Old Barrow Island and a part of Walney Island. The regular streets of part of the town, arranged in rectangles, have been already noticed. The chief industries are the manufacture of iron and steel, shipbuilding, gun mounting, engineering, boiler making, jute spinning and weaving, the manufacture of bricks, the importation of timber, paper making, railway works, cement works, etc. The principal public buildings are the Town Hall, the municipal buildings, Technical School, Barrow Hematite Steel Company's works, started in 1859, and Vickers, Sons and Maxim's works on Walney Island. The first docks were opened in 1867. The docks all communicate with one another
and have about 300 acres of water area.
The Devonshire and Buckley docks, between Old Barrow Island and the mainland, are spanned by a high-level bridge. Cavendish and Ramsden docks extend south-eastward between Barrow and Peel. Furness Abbey is a short distance north of the town, and Peel Island with its ruined castle is about 4 miles away southward. Blackpool, municipal borough. Population 47,348. Provisional figures for 1911, 58,376. A municipal borough and watering place on the coast between the estuaries of the Weir and Ribble, 18 miles west-north-west of Preston. It is the headquarters of a county court district. Owing to its advantageous position as regards climate and scenery, Blackpool became a watering place in the early days of resort to the sea more than 100 years ago. It has increased greatly of recent years, but large as its population is, it forms a very small fraction of the number of visitors who annually flock to the town. For the housing and entertaining of these are hotels and lodging houses, winter gardens, and nearly 3 miles of promenade. Pleasure steamers also leave Blackpool for various places. Bolton-le Sands, population 902. A village 4 miles north of Lancaster, close to the shores of Morecambe Bay. The tower of the church is a good example of the Perpendicular style. The grammar school was founded by Thomas Ashton in 1619. It is now an elementary school. Broughton West, population 1117. A civil parish containing the town of Broughton-in-Furness is 9 miles north-west of Ulverston. It has a large market-place with an obelisk of the time of George III. Broughton Church has a Norman doorway. The Broughton Tower, a peel tower of uncertain age, is built into a modern edifice. The town is a convenient starting point from which to view the beautiful scenery of the Duddon Valley. Carnforth, urban district, population 3040, is a township containing the village of the same name, situated 6½ miles north of Lancaster. Iron smelting works give employment to many of the inhabitants. Carnforth is an important railway centre and junction of the North Western, Midland and Furness lines. The limestone of the neighbourhood is tunnelled by several caverns. Borwick Hall, an Elizabethan and Jacobean mansion, lies 2 miles north-east of Carnforth. Land has been reclaimed in the mouth of the Keer, and the work of reclamation is still proceeding. Cartmel, see Lower Allithwaite. Caton, population 1181. A township and village on the left bank of the Lune, 5 miles north-east of Lancaster. Roman antiquities have been found here, including a milestone. The scenery of the Lune valley near Caton is celebrated, and was the subject of a well-known picture by Turner. Colton, population 1648. A village situated among the Furness Fells, not far from the foot of Coniston Lake. The parish contains several scattered hamlets. Colton Old Hall was formerly the seat of the Sands family. Coniston, population 1111. A village near the head of Coniston Lake, and at the eastern foot of Coniston Old Man. It is an important tourist centre. Formerly extensive copper mines and some lead mines were worked here, and it is still an important centre for slates, for which large quarries are opened on Coniston Old Man and in Tilberthwaite. Prehistoric hut circles and other relics are scattered over the moor to the south-west of the village. Coniston Hall, 1 mile from the village by the lake, is a 15th century seat of the Flemings, with round chimneys characteristic of the district. John Ruskin lived for many years at Brantwood on the other side of the lake, and is buried in the churchyard. The Ruskin Museum is in the village. Dalton-in-Furness, urban district, population 13,020. A market town distant nearly 5 miles south-west of Ulverston in the Furness iron ore district. Dalton Castle has been noticed in chapter 22. The town is mainly modern, owing its rise to the iron ore industry. Furness Abbey is within easy reach of this place. Fleetwood, urban district, population 12,082. A parish town, port and watering place at the mouth of the Weir on its south side. The docks are extensive and possess a grain elevator. There is an esplanade, and electric trams connect Fleetwood with Blackpool. Knott End, a rising watering place on the opposite side of the river, is connected with Fleetwood by a ferry. Steamers leave Fleetwood harbour for various places. This place is one of the most important fishery ports in England. Rossall School by the coast, about 2 miles south-west of Fleetwood, is one of the great public schools in Lancashire. It was opened in 1844. Freckleton, population 1239. an ecclesiastical parish, township and village near the estuary of the Ribble, west of Preston. The Neb of Neeze to the south of the village is believed to be the site of a Roman port. Fulwood, population 5238, is about a mile north of Preston, of which it is a suburb. Extensive barracks are erected here. Garstang, population 808. A market town nearly half-way between Preston and Lancaster, on the Weir, having a triangular market-place with restored market cross. At Churchtown, south-west of Garstang, is an old church. The ruins of Greenhalgh Castle are close to Garstang. The Garstang Town Trust still manages the public lighting, the town hall, and other matters under a charter of Charles II. Grange over Sands, urban district, population 1993. Situated beneath cliffs on the shores of Morecambe Bay at the mouth of the Kent estuary, 9 miles east of Ulverston, is supposed to owe its name to having been a grange of Furness Abbey. Owing to its mild climate and sheltered position, it has become a favourite watering place. Halton, population 890. A village 2.5 miles east-north-east of Lancaster, on the right bank of the Lune. Remains of pre-Norman crosses are preserved in the church and churchyard. A moat hill, possibly Norman, stands close by the village. Hawkshead, population 638. A small town near the head of Esthwaite Lake, 5 miles south-south-west of Ambleside. It possesses picturesque narrow crooked streets. The church is a 15th century structure. The grammar school, now closed, was founded by Archbishop Sandys in 1585. The poet Wordsworth was educated here. Hawkshead Hall, north-west of the town, was a medieval manor house belonging to Furness Abbey. Heysham, urban district, population 3693. A village on the west side of the peninsula between the Lune estuary and Morecambe Bay, on the shores of the bay, about 5 miles west of Lancaster. The churchyard is a veritable museum of antiquities, especially rich in relics of pre-Norman date. Some of these have been noticed in previous chapters. The village is also a health resort, and will no doubt ere long be continuous with Morecambe to the north. The place has recently become important on account of the harbour formed in connection with the steamers of the Midland Railway Company, which run from here to Belfast and Dublin. Kirkby Ireleth, population 1477. A village about 5 miles north-north-west of Ulverston. The church has a Norman doorway. Kirkby Hall is a 16th century manor house. Large slate quarries in the Silurian rocks occur on the fells above the village. South of Kirkby Ireleth is Askham, with iron furnaces. Kirkham, urban district, population 3693. About 8 miles west-north-west of Preston in the low grounds of the Lancashire plain. A Saxon name derived from the church, which was erected before the time of Roger of Poitou. Kirkham possesses a grammar school. Lancaster, municipal borough, population 40,329. The ancient capital of the county is situated on the River Lune, where it becomes tidal. Its history is a long and varied one. It was a Roman station, and under the Normans belonged to Roger of Poitou, who built the castle keep before 1102. Under John of Gaunt the town prospered, but was ruined during the Wars of the Roses. In the Civil War many battles took place here. The earliest existing town charter is dated 1193. Notwithstanding the antiquity of the town, there are few ancient buildings in it. Except for the castle and St Mary's Church, there is nothing left of earlier date than the 17th century. Many fine modern buildings have however been erected, latest and most prominent of which is the Town Hall, of classic design, presented by Lord Ashton and opened in 1910. The Royal Grammar School was founded in 1472 and is the oldest school in the county. The Storey Institute was founded by Sir Thomas Storey in commemoration of the Jubilee of Queen Victoria. On a height above the town is the Williamson Park. Lancaster was formerly a port of some importance, but owing to the changes in the estuary it has now dwindled. Prominent among the manufactures of the town are those of oilcloth and linoleum. Longridge urban district, population 3285, situated at the west end of Longridge Fell, is an interesting hill district. Lower Allithwaite, population 801, includes Cartmel, a small market town 2.5 miles west-northwest of Grange. The beautiful Priory Church is noticed in chapter 21. Several other buildings of interest are in the neighbourhood. Lower Holker, population 1062, 2 miles south-west of Cartmel. Holker Hall, a seat of the Duke of Devonshire, is a modern building on the east side of the Leven estuary. Lytham urban district, population 7185. A watering place on the north side of the estuary of the Ribble, opposite Southport, with the usual seaside attractions. Shrimp fishing is carried on here. Marton, population 1603, 2 miles south east of Blackpool. Marton Mere lies east of the village. Morecambe urban district, population 11,798. A municipal borough and watering place 4 miles north-west of Lancaster, was formerly known as Poulton le Sands. There are the usual attractions for visitors, many of whom come from Yorkshire, with which Morecambe is connected by Midland Railway. It commands a fine view of the Lake District hills. Mussels, shrimps and flatfish are taken here. Overton, population 346, a village 4 miles south-west of Lancaster, on a mound rising from the alluvial flats towards the mouth of the Lune. The church has a Norman doorway. Pennington, population 1510, a village 2 miles west-south-west of Ulverston. Ancient earthworks exist here. Pilling, population 1407, 7 miles west by north from Garstang, situated on low ground near Morecambe Bay. There is a gullery at Pilling Moss. Poulton le Fylde urban district, population 2223, was formerly the chief market town of the Fylde district. Near the old market cross are well preserved stocks and whipping post. The old tithe barn is in the street of that name. Preesall with Hackensall, population 1423, is in the Fylde. The watering place of Knott End on the estuary of the Weir opposite Fleetwood is in this parish. Knott End is governed by an urban district council. Salt mining is carried on in the parish. Hackensall Hall was built in 1656. Parrox Hall, the residence of the Ellotsons, lies north-west of Preesall. Preston, county borough, population 112,989. Provisional figures for 1911 117,113. Is built on fairly high ground in the north side of the River Ribble, on the important western highway to the north. It is a county, parliamentary and municipal borough, the chief town of the hundred of Amounderness and of Lancashire north of the Ribble, and an important railway centre. Though the bulk of the buildings are modern, the antiquity of the town is, among other things, shown by the use of the word gate for some of the principal streets. A charter was granted to Preston in 1179. The town is governed by a mayor and 36 councillors, of whom 12 are aldermen. It returns 2 members to Parliament. In 1307 the town was burnt by Robert Bruce. In the civil wars there was a small contest in 1643, and one of greater importance in 1648, when the Royalists were defeated by the Parliamentarians. In 1715 the Pretenders' party obtained possession of the town, but were compelled to surrender. Preston is one of the chief centres of the cotton trade, which is the principal industry of the town. The first Preston cotton mill was erected in 1777. Richard Arkwright worked in this town. Another industry is cable making. The port of Preston has modern docks covering 40 acres. A Franciscan friary stood about half a mile west of the market-place, and there was a Benedictine monastery at Tulketh. The fabric of the churches is modern. The grammar school is in Cross Street. A fine group of buildings includes the Town Hall, a Gothic building by Sir Gilbert Scott on the south side of the market-place, and the Harris Free Library and Museum to the east of the Town Hall. Ribchester, population 1237, situated on the north bank of the Ribble, 8 miles east-north-east of Preston, lies at the junction of 2 Roman roads, and the site of a Roman station is on the banks of the Ribble close to the village. Several old halls are in the neighbourhood on either side of the river. At Styd, half a mile east of Ribchester, are old almshouses and an interesting little church of the period transitional from Norman to Early English. The Roman Catholic school of Stonyhurst is about 4 miles east-north-east of Ribchester. It is one of the best known Roman Catholic public schools in the country. It was originally founded in 1592 and was reopened in 1794. St Anne's-on-Sea, urban district, population 6,838. A watering place on the north side of the estuary of the Ribble west of Lytham. A lighthouse marks the north shore of the Ribble. Shrimp fishing is carried on here. Seathwaite with Dunnerdale, population 263, a hamlet situated amid the beautiful scenery of the Duddon valley. Silverdale, population 582, a prettily situated village on a peninsula facing the estuary of the Kent. It is a summer resort for visitors. The scenery of the mountain limestone district around is interesting. Ulverston, urban district, population 10,064. A market town in the Furness Peninsula. Iron smelting is carried on here. There is a Norman doorway in the parish church. The monument to Sir J. Barrow on an adjoining hill is a conspicuous object. Swarthmoor Hall lies about 1 mile south of the town. Urswick, population 1186. 3 miles south-southwest of Ulverston. There are 2 villages, Great and Little Urswick, the former built around part of Urswick Tarn. Several antiquities are found in the neighbourhood. The grammar school was founded in 1579. It is now an elementary school. Warton with Lindeth, population 1482. Warton is a village situated under the eastern cliffs of Warton Crag at the head of Morecambe Bay. The perpendicular church has the shield of the Washington family built into the tower. The first President of the United States was descended from this family, and it is said that the American banner, the Stars and Stripes, was derived from the Washington arms. On Warton Crag are many antiquities, including the promontory fortress on the summit having its ramparts on the north. Yealand Conyers, population 267, and Yealand Redmayne, population 191, lie on the east side of a limestone hill 2 to 3 miles north of Carnforth. The villages are among the prettiest in the north of England.
End of chapters 26 to 27. End of North Lancashire, Cambridge County Geographies by J. E. Marr. Read by Phil Benson in Sydney, Australia.